达尼罗萨多尔曼沃西波舒文那苏鲁天都耶西里格夏三月东都的巴克荷兰哈达兰玛维克亚西马丁波图鲁格沙苏密毛毛地方智力耶西利多热古里沙蒙东丁法班那勒谦虚因多波吼金扎心扎扎心扎进红波多皮须见了那万法定公蒙沙利古人多里西耶里智梵蒂摩玛米苏嘿吼勒尼达哈吼吼吼沙格鲁图我丁玛西亚可为马兰达哈兰河可巴的独斗月山相隔里谢土天如苏那文舒波西欧曼尔多萨罗尼达曼尔多萨罗尼达
So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's online gathering and Dharma talk on the Four Divine Abodes. This Sanskrit word is Brahma Vihara, literally means abodes or dwelling of Brahma. It is a series of 4 virtues that constitutes a pre-Buddhist concept to which the Buddhist tradition gave its own interpretation. They are also called the Four Immeasurable. So we know that the Buddhist tradition teaches the 2 central paths and their practices for one to attain enlightenment, which are bodhicitta and prajna. Bodhicitta is the awakening mind based on pure love, compassion, and insight. Prajna is the ultimate form of wisdom, the wisdom beyond all wisdoms. In Mahayana Buddhism, these 2 paths are to be practiced through the Bodhisattva path of the 6 Pāramitās, the 6 perfections, which provide a 6-step approach and are to be practiced with the 4 immeasurables as the foundation, with the foundation of the mind. They further the height or level of bodhicitta and prajna. If you missed our talk on the sixth paramita, I've put in the chat the YouTube links to the recordings. You're welcome to watch them in your own time if you'd like. The four immeasurables are four boundless qualities. They're loving kindness, Maitri or Metta, compassion, Karuna, joy, Mudita, and equanimity, Upekkha. These four qualities expand our capacity for all internal and external experiences, therefore contributing to our progress on the path. So we're going to talk about these four different qualities, four different kinds of foundation for the mind and practices associated with them respectively between today's session and the one in mid-May. So we'll focus mostly on loving kindness and compassion in today's talk. For all practitioners on the path, no matter which vehicles or sects of Buddhism they belong to, it is essential to cultivate and obtain the quality of the four immeasurables. It is asserted that in Buddhism, if a practitioner does not have the mind from the cultivation and practices of the four immeasurables, they would go astray, because the four immeasurables constitute the very foundation of the Buddhist mind, which is empty of subjective filters, which holds the insights and wisdom that keeps one on the right path. The proactive cultivation of the four immeasurable qualities is an antidote to the habits and impulses of the three poisons, which are greed, hatred, and delusion, which are the primary creator of struggle, fear, and emotional afflictions in our lives. They're deeply rooted and strengthened by our mindless, habitual behaviors, taking us to places of alienation, shame, guilt, and despair that are far from where we wish to be or how we wish to be. This is why it's necessary to take up the cultivation of the four immeasurables. In Mahayana tradition, we walk the path of the Bodhisattva path to nurture a pure altruistic mind that is enlightened not only for ourselves, but also for the benefits of all sentient beings. The Bodhisattva have in mind the interest of others, which they realize indirectly by practicing the immeasurables. Bodhisattvas personally gain merit, which then they then can apply to the welfare and happiness of all beings. The Bodhisattvas place no limits on their qualities of the four immeasurables to serve all sentient beings distributed in the numberless universe of the 10 directions. At the same time, the practices of the immeasurables purify the mind of the Bodhisattva, which enhances the positive results of the Bodhisattva's actions. So as the name implies, the four immeasurables are four boundless qualities, the extent of which has no limit. These qualities have no measure. The immeasurability of these qualities implies the how of our practice, which is not to give up halfway, not to stop cultivating these qualities according to one's own assessment, thinking that I cannot have more loving kindness or more compassion, joy, or equanimity than I already have. But in fact, there's no end to the cultivation of the four immeasurables, and there is no end to our potential and capacity of experience. The more, the truer loving kindness we embody, the better, and it's the same with the other three. The practices of the four immeasurables are both important to ourselves and to all other beings, because they also help us develop a sense of ourselves in relation to others and the sense of our position in this universe. This is important because we only attain limited accomplishment if we engage in the challenging journey pursuing enlightenment only for our own benefits. In pursuing what we pursue as individuals, going after our own goals and getting our fulfillment, and one day we might start to think, this fulfillment I'm having, does it only matter to ourselves and is totally unrelated to the happiness of anybody else? And how short lived or long lasting is this fulfillment if it's only about ourselves? Or consider if it's merely about fulfilling our ego. It's important that our cultivation begins with ourselves, yet the end goal is not only about self serving, which strengthens the self and other dualistic view, which is a very limiting view. So we're using the four immeasurables through learning to develop and strengthen these qualities, to widen our circle, to expand our awareness, and to fully realize and embrace the interrelatedness of all things, so that we're not constrained being a prisoner of our own mind. Then we might be able to realize this egocentric view, which is rooted in the self and other dichotomy, as mere delusion, because anything we do, there is an impact. All things are radically interrelated. Everything comes into being by mutual co-arising and exists in mutual conditioning. This view allows us to see that all sentient beings wish to be happy, wish to be fulfilled, and we don't exclusively own our joys or sorrow, desires or wants. That's seeing the interrelatedness of things. In seeing this, our grip on our autonomous ego softens. So interrelatedness provides us this reality to attend to, and in living this reality, we would gradually attain the qualities of non-self and genuine selflessness, which is not to negate or destroy the self, but rather is about self-transformation and self-contextualization without the presence of the controlling ego. So the view of the interrelatedness of things and our practices of the four immeasurables further each other. They both bring our awareness to a broader context. When this attitude and view of the non-self, of the interrelatedness or emptiness become our way of life, we would have the unwavering determination and an open and courageous heart to diligently cultivate and better ourselves in order to attain the unsurpassable enlightenment. Similarly, the four divine abodes are not some transcendent states unfamiliar to us, but are pathways for us to train, develop, and nurture the seeds of unconditional love and kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity that are already there in our nature. As practitioners, we begin our path and our positive qualities not being immeasurable or unshakable. And because of the instability of our mind and of our spiritual achievement, we constantly progress and regress on the path. It can be frustrating, but it's all normal. We just need to observe, recognize, and acknowledge the changes in our mind, coming to being aware of all the moments when the four immeasurable qualities are absent, being aware of the moments where we close our heart and turn away from suffering, the moments of darkness when ego becomes overpowering, the moments of impulsiveness and reactivity when equanimity is completely forgotten. Instead of feeling frustrated and discouraged by these many moments of mindlessness, we embrace this view, this reality about ourselves with an accepting mind, to embrace and welcome the opportunities to nurture and cultivate the immeasurable capacities of our hearts, to explore the immeasurable capacity of experiencing the universe in all kinds of existence, that is, to cultivate kindness in the midst of unkindness, to cultivate compassion when you feel most resistance in yourself, to cultivate a joy which is not a result of mental reactivity in the midst of sorrow or happiness, and to cultivate equanimity through all the ups and downs that life makes us feel. There is a sense of readiness in this practice. We don't need to wait for certain moments or wait for the ideal conditions to arise for us to be kind, compassionate, joyful, and balanced within. The path getting out of samsara is long, but this readiness would bring us onto the shortcut. Without regressing repeatedly, the determination to not make the same mistake again or not to generate the same mental defilement repeatedly help us stay on the path rather than going on detours after detours. So firstly, the cultivation of loving kindness, Maitri in Sanskrit, and Metta in Pali. Loving kindness is a quality of the mind which expresses itself in behavior. It is a heartfelt wish for the being who you're focusing on in your mind to be well and happy. To think about beings with unconditional love and always to bring safety and happiness to beings. Practicing Maitri removes hostility that we might harbor in our minds toward ourselves and other beings. When we have pure love, pure loving kindness in our mind, it counteracts the negative mental events such as hatred, avarice, a need for rivalry, indifference, and self-centeredness. This is the very direct practical purpose of the practice of loving kindness. And the simple effects of this immeasurable quality is that loving kindness brings being happiness and dissolves hostility and enmity. We can ask ourselves if we brought happiness to sentient beings. If the answer is no, then our mind is not fully holding the essence of loving kindness, which is unconditional and devoid of subjective perceptions. A general mindset and direction for us to cultivate loving kindness is to hold all sentient beings in our heart and wish them well, not only to those we have a connection with, and also don't forget about yourself. And that extends from loving kindness for humans to animals and to other beings in the lower and upper realms that are within the 6 realms of samsara. Like a bodhisattva, when witnessing the misfortunes in this world, we should extend our hands to help liberate beings from suffering. This is what Mahayana Buddhism promotes and what a practitioner should do, to have a mind of loving kindness and work on oneself so one may have the wisdom to practice skillful means for different beings. For instance, to tailor their messages to different audiences or using specific approaches for specific audiences. Having in mind the interest of the being we wish to help motivates us to do so, to be skillful. And there are 3 kinds of Maitri. As mentioned in the Mahaprajna Pāramitās Shastra, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra written by Nagarjuna, in chapter 33, there are 3 kinds of Maitri. First, that which has being as object. Second, that which has phenomena as object. Third, that which has no object. The first one, Maitri, directed toward all sentient beings, is found mainly among worldly people who are practicing on the path of training yet have not completely dissolved or purified their impurity, meaning mental defilement, qualities, and dualistic view that bring them afflictions. So this is the kind of loving kindness that we who are not enlightened yet relate to the most. Even though we can have this kind of loving kindness and it's genuine, we still grasp onto the dualistic view of self and other dichotomy, even though we might understand its disadvantages cognitively. There is still distance to the realization of the Buddhist emptiness, which negates the distinctions of all things. So the worldly mind is still trying to differentiate sentient beings constantly and is still rooted in the physical world, where we have different shapes, different bodies, which can make it difficult to see that we are all actually not different from one another. We all wish to be happy. We all wish to be liberated. The example of a differentiating mind can be some parents are willing to sacrifice themselves for their children, but can they do the same for others' children? Maybe yes, or maybe no. The parents' love for their children is loving kindness, but it's a limited form of loving kindness since it's only directed to limited objects and is driven based on their subjectivity. Another example can be a person can behave in an altruistic manner, seemingly from a place of non-self or selflessness. Yet, all the altruistic actions could also come from a place of need, a need to be needed by others, or maybe a need for recognition, and that's ego's work. Or a person can be very empathetic and sincere. There's care, concerns, understanding involved. That's loving kindness. Yet the emotions can become overpowering. So this loving kindness is in its limited form because it arises from such an emotional state where there is little space for groundedness and equanimity because it's full of emotions. Even though such love is genuine and sincere, when such care and concern becomes burdening without balancing energy from groundedness and equanimity, the side effects can be exhaustion, anxiety, or fear. So this is the first kind of Maitri, which is directed towards all sentient beings from a worldly being. The second kind, Dharma Lambana, which is directed towards phenomena or Dharma, refers to mostly specifically to the loving kindness of arhats, but others or we can experience and have part of this kind of loving kindness as well. In the same chapter where the three kinds of Maitris are mentioned, the Garjuna includes the descriptions of beings that generate this kind of loving kindness. They are arhats who have destroyed the impurities, the Pratya Buddhas, and the Buddhas. Arhats in Mahayana Buddhist traditions are people who are far advanced along the path of enlightenment, but may not have reached full Buddhahood. Pratya Buddhas are individuals who independently achieve liberation without the aid of teacher and without teaching others about the path. They're being who basically keep the fruit of enlightenment all to themselves. So these beings have destroyed the concept of self and eliminated the notions of identity and difference among beings. They still perceive individual sentient being through form and perception through the five skandhas. Yes, yet they've realized that each sentient being's existence is the result of causes and conditions. They have realized the truth of impermanence as well as the truth of existence subjected to reincarnation in the samsara. They realize clearly that if all sentient beings do not work on purifying themselves, resolving their karma, and eradicating ignorance, they will be forever entangled in the effects of their own existential confusion, suffering, and afflictions. And from this understanding of the suffering of the beings in samsara, they think of all sentient beings with this kind of loving kindness. So their loving kindness is a realization through understanding the law of the world, which is Dharma, the law of existence in samsara, thus the term Dharma Lambana. The third kind of loving kindness is that which has no object, which observes the non-apprehendable. Nagarjuna explains in the same text, this is the one that only the Buddha possess. Why? The mind of the Buddha does not rest on the conditioned or on the unconditioned. It does not rest on the past, the future, or the present. The Buddhists know that all objects are not real, are erroneous and deceptive. This is why their mind is without object. Beings do not know the true nature of things. They wander through the five destinies. Their minds are attached to things. They make distinctions, make certain things and reject other things. And so the Buddhists use the wisdom of the true nature of things and make beings obtain it. This is the loving kindness without object. To Buddhists, they have no attachment to the difference between self and non-self, no attachment to the logic of the Dharma, like Arhats have. There's no difference between purity and defilement for the Buddha, because they embody the truth that everything is empty of its self-nature. So Buddha's loving kindness is that kind of unconditional love in the ultimate sense. It does not choose its objects, but is directed equally to all sentient beings, which ontologically are deemed ultimately non-existent. That is the realization of emptiness. So Buddha's metta is in its pure existence, not arising from any causes or condition. It is a state where emptiness, pure wisdom, and love is in union. It's a state that manifests prajna wisdom. So these are the three kinds of loving kindness. We can see that there are real, genuine wishes for the well-being of sentient beings. Sincerity is not in question here. The differences between these three kinds of metta lie in the levels of wisdom of the mind, of the kind of mind these metta are from. The immeasurable compassion is complementary to loving kindness. They are very similar. While metta focuses on sentient beings finding joy, compassion focuses on sentient beings who are suffering. Compassion is also kindness, but the caring aspect is comparatively greater. Compassion is identifying the suffering of others as one's own. To think with compassion of beings who are suffering in the samsara, of all sorts of bodily suffering and mental suffering, that's the capacity to be empathetic. Yet compassion is far more than having empathy. Through witnessing individuals in suffering, humans, animals, ghosts, or other kinds of spirits, we recognize the truth of existence, the suffering, which leads to the wish for those individuals to be free of the suffering they're experiencing. It implies a different realization, and not only about how we feel, but also a kind of insight and understanding of reality. The realization that all the sentient beings in samsara have at one point been my friends or enemies, family, lovers, servants, or owners. The realization of the truth of our own suffering and the suffering of others is the underlying foundation of compassion. While loving kindness practice is to learn to be with, be in all moments, people, and experiences, to have a loving and kind way to live in this world with all its joy and sorrow. Compassion practice is concerned with embodiment. It is an all-encompassing energy that is concerned with our response to the sorrow and pain of the world through mindfulness and the mind of loving kindness. It is to learn to understand, to develop and expand our capacity for empathy and responsiveness. It is also a commitment to healing suffering when it can be healed, addressing and eradicating the causes of suffering when it can be addressed and eradicated. So the practice of compassion is to be one with the collective suffering that penetrates all existence in samsara. The resultant power and wisdom from the practice will not only help liberate all sentient beings, removing potential and existing harm towards other beings and oneself, but also will transform the suffering within oneself and purify one's negative karma. I would like to share this story of Asanga, the Indian scholar and the founder of the Yogacara school, who really exemplified the compassionate quality of the Bodhisattva. Asanga's Buddhist path was determined by his mother even before he was conceived. His mother, a woman named Pratisha Shila, was a Brahmin who witnessed the fall of Abhidharma. And as a woman in the society back then, she couldn't do anything to help promote Buddhism. So she thought she must marry a man and then have sons so that they can carry on this mission. So this woman gave birth to Asanga in the year 375 in the ancient capital of Gandhara. She then married another man and gave birth to Vasubandhu, who later became an influential Indian Buddhist monk and scholar from Gandhara. So the two sons grew up and asked their mom about the livelihood of their parents. The mother told them, "You two were not born to take up your father's job. Rather, you are born to propagate Buddha Dharma. I hope you study hard and cultivate yourself well, so in the future you can promote Abhidharma." So Vasubandhu found his own guru to study the path of Abhidharma, while Asanga went into the mountain with the wish to see Bodhisattva Maitreya for his advice. The way to see Maitreya is through visualization, which is an ability that would come as one goes deeper in one's practice. But after 6 years of meditative practices in the mountain, Asanga still hadn't any vision or not even dreamt of Maitreya. He began to feel frustrated and decided to exit the mountain. On the way out, he encountered someone who was using a piece of soft cloth wiping a metal stick. So Asanga asked about this purpose. The person said, "I don't have a needle, so I need to wipe the stick down to a needle." Asanga began to think, the cloth is so soft, it's impossible that the stick can turn into a needle. Even if it does, will this person still be in this world? Witnessing this worldly man sacrificing so much for things that are so meaningless led Asanga to an understanding that by comparison, he is really not diligent or patient enough with his cultivation, and he must have resilience and forbearance. So he returned to his spot in the mountain and practiced there for another 3 years. Still, no connection with Maitreya. This time he thought indeed he's not going to achieve anything, so he decided to leave the mountain again. On the way, he stopped in front of a tall boulder, and the person in front of it was rubbing the rock with a wet feather. Asanga asked about the purpose of doing this, and learned that the big rock blocks the sun for the man's house, and he wished to brush and rub the rock until it disappears. Seeing this, Asanga thought, I must carry on my penance if I want to see significant changes in me. So he went back to his cave, but after another 3 years, still didn't see Maitreya in his meditation. So he was really certain this time that there is no way for him to attain enlightenment. So he began to walk out of the mountain again. On the road, he encountered a female dog whose both hind legs were severely injured and the one looks infested. There appears to be some maggots already. The dog seemed frantic, still barking hysterically toward Asanga, attempted to bite him. In that moment, the Sangha generated an enormous amount of compassion in him for the dog, and he decided to feed some of his flesh to the dog. After this, he wanted to clean the maggots off the dog's leg, but had the concern that he might accidentally kill those creatures if he used his fingers. So he figured that he should use his tongue to clean the area. But because the wound looks really bad and Asanga couldn't have his eye open to do this, he closed his eyes and stuck his tongue out, approaching the leg. His tongue ended up touching the ground instead of the dog, so he was shocked and opened his eyes, and the dog he saw was not in sight anymore. Instead, the golden Dharmakaya, the light body of Maitreya, appeared. Asanga said to the Bodhisattva, "Your signal is so weak that the connection couldn't be established and I couldn't see you." Maitreya said, "I never hid from you, actually. I am always with you. But due to your negative karma, you were not able to see me. But after 12 years of practice, you've reduced your negative karma. But you only saw me as a female dog. But then you generated great compassion in your mind, which purifies all the remaining negative karma. So you've removed the blockages and are now able to truly see me. If you don't believe me, just put me on your shoulders and walk around to see if others can see me or not." So Asanga carried Maitreya on his right shoulder and walked into the market. He asked around him, "What do you see on my shoulder?" People there said nothing. Only an old woman who still had a small amount of negative karma said, "There is a rotten dog body on your shoulder." After this, Maitreya brought Asanga into his realm and taught him all the divine Dharma. Asanga returned to the human realm and began to propagate Mahayana Buddhism afterwards. This is the story of Asanga, who purified himself through the power of compassion. So Asanga's compassion is expressed in both his state of mind and his behaviors, in his reactions to what he encountered. In his own practice, he attained the ability to care for other beings and understand the suffering of all beings' existence, which is the first noble truth. So his actions were compassionate and weren't meant for his personal gain. When he makes certain actions as the conditions arise, the compassion in him is not a state of emotion but an understanding, rooted in his being, his existence. In the presence of such understanding, there is clarity and wisdom in one's mind. Such clarity is not indifference. It is not about dismissing, diminishing, or neglecting all the natural emotional responses we have, the sorrows, the grief, and the fears. Everyone's emotions occur due to different causes and conditions and are very personal and real in our lives. The Buddha, in his early teachings, taught about suffering. His concluding teaching is, there is dukkha and there is the end of dukkha. Dukkha means suffering. So suffering is really just there, being a part of the reality of this world. The entire path of awakening is dedicated to bring suffering to an end, to have the causes and effects of suffering exhausted. Compassion is the key. It is an all-encompassing energy that's essential to our well-being and capacity to liberate ourselves first in order to liberate others. It is normal for our existence that if we break our legs, it'll hurt. If we grieve, it hurts. Chronic pain hurts. Mental afflictions hurt. These physical and mental sufferings do happen very often. And sometimes we don't get to choose what we want and what we don't want. And we also cannot wander around the why me question, which actually derives from the belief that we alone should be exempt from pain or suffering, which is delusional and does not lead to any liberating conclusion. And we may live mindfully, yet life can still surprise us. Everything in our life continue to be inextricably interwoven with the change and instability, which is not optional. This is another aspect of the truth of suffering, living this life knowing that it's subjected to the law of impermanence. Understanding these aspects of suffering is central in the path of compassion. We can restore our agency in how we react to all the suffering experiences through finding inner poise and grace. Imagine a scenario where a person is injured by a knife. It hurts, and it will be equally painful for the most insightful person and the least mindful person. If the person starts to generate reactions or of aversion, fear, shame, and contempt, they will pattern and shape their world of the moment with such qualities. Those negative emotional reactions actually create new pain on top of the original pain, be it a rumination session where the mind continues to produce new afflictions on top of existing afflictions. In those moments, the mind is lacking compassion, which is understanding and care. So, the ability to be one with your own suffering, not reacting to it, is self compassion, a kind of inner power so that we have the willingness to turn toward the realities and difficulties of our existence. That includes aging, sickness, and death. Practicing compassion allows us to live a life guided by clarity and understanding rather than by denial and fear. It has to begin with oneself first, otherwise, it's similar to the example I gave on loving kindness, those outward altruistic behaviors, which may not reflect a true compassionate mind, but instead ego. The practice begins with our willingness to transform the habitual reactions and to learn to walk flexibly on the new pathways of responsiveness in every present moment. We embrace all states of existence, learn to turn toward rather than away from any situations, to include rather than to exclude, because the compassionate mind can touch and hold everything. And as we diligently and patiently practice compassion, we will find liberation every time when we open our hearts a little bit more and find ourselves being able to attend to more experiences and situations rather than to ignore them, being able to open to the suffering of our own heart and the suffering of the world. So we've covered these two immeasurable qualities, metta and compassion, these all-encompassing qualities that expresses themselves in our mental and physical behaviors. Our self-cultivation is also an all-encompassing journey that follows many teachings. So we combined all the teachings that are helpful. For instance, the first paramita of the six paramita is dana, which means generosity. The practice for developing the willingness to give and transforming our possessiveness of anything we think we own. So we practice to give without reservation, to give your loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity wherever conditions call for them. The Bodhisattva path and many other right paths for awakening all consist of the practice of the four immeasurables and the practice of the six paramitas. The six paramitas is a path to walk and approach. The four immeasurables serve to create a foundation of the mind. So there is no distinction between self-cultivation practices and our daily life. So I encourage all of us to see this, to have the awareness that we have all the conditions for us to practice and cultivate ourselves constantly during every moment of our life, to cultivate the immeasurables so that we can become always at home in these four divine abodes and being one with this mind, this home, to walk the Bodhisattva path, following the 6 Pāramitās. So let's practice together to conclude this talk. Let us join palms together in front of the chest so we can do a dedication practice together to send Metta and Karuna to all sentient beings. And when we say all sentient beings, don't forget to include ourselves. May all sentient beings open to the clear understanding of reality and open to the loving kindness and compassion of the mind. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and the sources of suffering. May all sentient beings open to a sense of appreciation of this one precious life. Let the boundless love of our hearts spread to every corner of the world. May there be no more hatred or hostility. May all living beings rejoice in the goodwill that has been brought forth by the love we share. 有缘